Well, we've done it. We finally got to this one. For years, whenever people talked about disappointing sequels, this movie was often one of the first examples that came up. Before there was debate about the Star Wars sequels, before there were endless discussions about legacy sequels, there was Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And what's frustrating is there actually are some good ideas in this movie. On paper, this should have worked. The original Indiana Jones trilogy took place primarily in the 30s and 40s, so naturally, Indy was fighting Nazis. But by the 50s, the world had changed. The Cold War had begun, and communism had become America's new geopolitical rival. So replacing Nazis with Soviet agents is actually a logical progression for the franchise. In fact, one of the things I like most about the movie is that it does try something different. Instead of simply doing Raiders again, it embraces 1950s culture. You have Cold War paranoia, government conspiracies, atomic testing, and some science fiction influences, which is actually a clever idea. The problem is none of it comes together the way it should. And Harrison Ford is still great. One of the biggest concerns people had before the movie came out was whether an older Indiana Jones could still carry an action-adventure film. Ford answers that question almost immediately. He's still charismatic, funny, and completely believable as Indiana Jones. The issue wasn't Harrison Ford. The issue is that the script constantly reminds us how old he is. A few jokes about age are fine, Indy is older, but the movie keeps bringing it up over and over again. Feels like every few scenes someone has to make another comment about his age or how he can't keep up anymore. The original trilogy made Indy feel human because he got tired, got punched, got scared, and made mistakes. Crystal Skull sometimes feels like it's actively apologizing for having an older hero. And then we get Shia LaBeouf as Mutt Williams, and this is where the movie starts to lose me. Yeah, he was a huge star in 2008. Transformers had just made him one of Hollywood's biggest young actors, and it's obvious the filmmakers wanted to be the next generation of Indiana Jones, but he doesn't work. His character feels forced into the story rather than naturally growing out of it. Every scene seems designed to convince the audience that he's cool. The leather jacket, the motorcycle, the rebellious bad guy attitude, the constant wisecracks, it all feels like the movie is trying way too hard. Instead of becoming a likable sidekick or comic relief, he's just annoying and he drags down the pacing whenever he's on screen. And then there are the action scenes. This is where the movie really starts to fall apart. Now, to some degree, Indiana Jones has always been slightly realistic. Like, Raiders has faces melting off, and Temple of Doom has people surviving minecart chases, and Last Crusade has a centuries-old knight gathering the Holy Grail. Like, those movies aren't realistic, but they feel believable within the own worlds and rules they've established. Crystal Skull goes way too far with it. The infamous refrigerator scene is probably the most infamous example. For those of you who somehow don't know, Indy somehow survives a nuclear explosion by climbing inside a refrigerator, which then launches itself and flies around like the TARDIS, lands with a thump, and somehow this man in his 60s survives completely unscathed without any sort of broken bones or other injuries. Even by Indiana Jones standards, that's ridiculous. The movie asks the audience to accept something so absurd, it completely breaks immersion. It's one of those scenes where instead of being invested in the story, you're sitting there wondering who greenlit this and thought it was a good idea. And somehow, that's not even the most over-the-top moment. The jungle chase goes on forever, people are sword fighting on moving vehicles, characters survive ridiculous impacts, Shia LaBeouf swings through the jungle with monkeys like he's Tarzan. Every few minutes, something happens that makes you roll your eyes. The original trilogy used practical effects whenever possible. Even when something impossible happened, it feels tangible because it was happening in a real environment. Crystal Skull relies much more heavily on CGI, and boy does it show. Many scenes have that artificial early 2000s digital look that did not age well. And of course, there are the villains of the film. Now, Kate Blanchett is usually a pretty good actress, but her character is just not that memorable. Compared to Belloc or Mola Ram, where she's surprisingly forgettable. Part of the problem is the accent, because sometimes it sounds convincing, but other times it sounds like she's doing this caricature of Russians, and it's inconsistent enough that it just becomes really distracting. Despite all the talk about her psychic abilities and intelligence, she never really feels all that threatening. The movie keeps telling us she's dangerous, but never really shows us why. One bright spot, though, is the return of Marion Ravenwood. I do think bringing her back was the right decision. Karen Allen steps right back into the role as if no time has passed. She still has chemistry with Harrison Ford. She still has the fiery personality that made her so memorable in Raiders. Whenever she shows up, the movie gets slightly better. Seeing Indy and Marion reunited is genuinely sweet. Their relationship gives the movie an emotional anchor that it desperately needs. In fact, some of the best scenes are simply watching those characters interact again. For a few moments, you can almost imagine you're watching the sequel fans have waited nearly 20 years to see. But then we arrive at that ending. The aliens. And this is where the movie loses me completely. Now, I know some people are probably going to say, well, how are aliens any more far-fetched than ghosts and the Holy Grail? And that's a fair question. The issue isn't that the aliens are inherently less believable. The issue is they feel wrong for the world of the Indiana Jones films. The earlier movies were rooted in mythology, religion, archaeology, and ancient legends. Even when some supernatural things happened, they felt connected to history. The aliens feel like they wandered in from an entirely different genre altogether. Yes, 1950 science fiction often featured extraterrestrials, and yes, it fits the decade of the film, but just because it fits the decade doesn't mean that it fits Indiana Jones. By the time we get interdimensional beings are flying away in the spaceship, the movie no longer feels like Indiana Jones. It feels like a completely different movie. And that's the biggest problem with the film. It's not bad because it's trying something new. It's bad because the things it's trying don't feel compatible with what made Indiana Jones special in the first place. What's especially frustrating is that you can see a better version hiding underneath. The Cold War setting's a pretty good idea, an older Indy could be a good idea, Beard returning was a good idea, and the mystery starts off strong. I mean, the opening warehouse sequence of the first 30 minutes is generally fun. There are moments throughout the film where you can see little bits of the classic Indiana Jones, but the movie keeps making decisions that pull you out of the film. Every time it starts building momentum, something happens that just makes you facepalm or scratch your head. And it's probably one of the most disappointing movies of the franchise. Not because it's the worst made film ever, and not because it's completely unwatchable, but because the ingredients were all there. Harrison Ford, Spielberg, George Lucas, Indiana Jones, and somehow the final product still missed the mark. But even the greatest filmmakers have off days. Nobody has a perfect track record. And unfortunately, The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is one of those rare times where a legendary creative team simply did not get it right. So for me, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull gets a D+, a 6 out of 10, and 1 out of 5 stars. Luckily, Spielberg would follow this up with what I consider the true Indiana Jones 4, The Adventures of Tintin. But I already reviewed that back in 2022, and I reviewed all the Nickelodeon movies, so if you want to see it, it's in the Spielberg playlist or the Nick Member playlist. You can check it out from either one of those, and I'll see you next time.